The annual Harrington Foundation Gala drew Manhattan's most powerful names: senators, hedge fund managers, old money families, who wrote checks with more zeros than most people earned in a lifetime. Evelyn Harrington sat near the edge of the ballroom in her wheelchair, watching the room move around her like water around a stone. No one stopped. No one stayed. When the orchestra began its final waltz, and every couple drifted toward the dance floor, she reached for the wheels of her chair to leave the same way she had left every year before. Then a man in a cleaning uniform stepped out from behind the stage curtain, walked straight across the center of the floor, and extended his hand directly to her. The entire room went silent. The hand stayed there, extended open, waiting, belonging to a man whose uniform identified him as part of the invisible workforce that kept events like this one running without ever being seen. His name tag read, Benjamin. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. He was not a guest. He was not supposed to be standing in the middle of the dance floor at all, and every person in that ballroom knew it. The orchestra had slowed its tempo without quite stopping, the musicians watching from the stage with the same stunned expression as the 200 guests who had gone utterly still around them. Evelyn Harrington looked at the hand. Then she looked at the man it belonged to. Benjamin Carter held her gaze without flinching, without smiling nervously, the way people did when they realized they had overstepped. He simply waited, the way someone waits when they have already decided the answer to the question doesn't change what they did. She took his hand. The decision moved through the room like a current. People shifted, leaned toward their companions, exchanged glances that carried entire conversations without a single word. A woman near the champagne table pressed 2 fingers to her lips. A man in a charcoal tuxedo said something under his breath to the person beside him, and the person beside him exhaled a short, disbelieving sound that was almost a laugh. Benjamin didn't lead her onto the floor the way a dance partner would. Instead, he stepped beside the wheelchair, one hand still holding hers, and with a quiet, practiced ease, the kind that didn't announce itself, he began to guide the chair in slow, deliberate arcs that followed the shape of the waltz. He used the music. He used the space. He turned the chair with a careful rhythm so that Evelyn's movement became part of the dance, rather than an accommodation to it. And the distinction was everything. This was not a man helping someone across a street. This was something else entirely. The waltz didn't stop. The orchestra, to their credit, continued playing. For 3 minutes, Evelyn Harrington moved across the dance floor of her own gala and felt for the first time in longer than she could name that she was simply a woman at a party. When the music ended, Benjamin released her hand with the same steadiness with which he had offered it. He gave a single unhurried nod, not a bow, not a performance, and stepped back. The applause that followed was scattered, uncertain, the kind that comes from people who aren't sure what they just witnessed, but feel obligated to respond to it. Evelyn said nothing to the crowd. She turned her chair and moved toward the corridor, and the evening closed back over the room like water over a stone, as though it had never been broken at all. She didn't sleep that night. This wasn't unusual. Sleep had been a negotiation since the accident, something she had to schedule and manage the way she managed quarterly reports, with structure, with discipline, with the understanding that it would not simply come on its own. But that night, she lay in the dark of her Upper East Side apartment and kept returning to the same moment. Not the applause, not the stares, the hand. The way it had been offered without hesitation and without theater. The way Benjamin Carter had looked at her as though the wheelchair was the least interesting thing in the room. Evelyn had spent 11 years learning to read rooms. After the accident, she had made herself into a student of other people's discomfort, cataloging the ways they revealed themselves without realizing it, the half-second too long before they spoke to her, the slightly elevated volume, the unconscious physical adjustment that meant they had decided somewhere below awareness that she was fragile. She had learned to identify these signals the way a trader identifies patterns in data quickly, accurately without sentiment. It was useful. It was also exhausting. Benjamin Carter had displayed none of them. She had her assistant pull his employment file by 9 the following morning. Benjamin James Carter, 35 years old, had worked for Meridian Building Services for 4 years. His performance reviews were consistent, thorough, reliable, punctual, no complaints. Before that, he had held 2 other positions in facilities maintenance. His divorce had finalized 3 years ago. He had no debt beyond ordinary living expenses. There was nothing in the file that explained the previous evening, because what he had done was not the kind of thing that showed up in employment records. Evelyn set the file down and looked out at the city. Then she picked up the phone and called her director of operations. The offer she extended was specific. Harrington Group's Midtown headquarters required a facilities operations coordinator, a position that had been quietly open for several months because the candidates they'd interviewed had all been wrong in ways that were difficult to articulate. The role involved overseeing building maintenance contracts, vendor relationships, and physical operations across 3 floors. It was real work. It paid more than 4 times what Benjamin was earning at Meridian, and it came with benefits, stability, and a title that meant something on a resume. She did not offer it to him as a favor. She offered it because she had a vacancy, and she had, in the space of 3 minutes the night before, observed that Benjamin Carter moved through a complex situation with a composure and awareness that most of her senior staff couldn't manage in a boardroom. Whether or not he understood logistics was something she could verify. Whether or not he understood how to read a moment that was harder to teach. The call was made through HR. Evelyn had no intention of making it personal. Benjamin received the offer on a Tuesday morning, standing in the parking structure of a commercial building on West 42nd Street, in the middle of a shift. The HR coordinator on the phone was professional and brief. Harrington Group facilities, coordination, the salary figure, the start date. If he was interested, a follow-up email with full details. He stood there after the call ended, phone in his hand, looking at the oil stain on the concrete floor in front of him. He had grown up in Buffalo, the son of a man who drove a delivery truck and a woman who taught 2nd grade, and he had internalized early the understanding that work was not glamorous, that it was simply what you did, and that doing it well was its own kind of dignity. He had married at 28 and believed it. When the marriage ended, it didn't end cleanly. It ended in the slow, grinding way that left no particular villain and no satisfying explanation, only the accumulated weight of 2 people who had stopped choosing each other in increments so small they didn't notice until it was finished. He had come out the other side quieter than he'd gone, and more deliberate, less interested in anything that required him to perform a version of himself he didn't actually recognize. The offer from Harrington Group was not something he had asked for. He also understood that he would be a fool to refuse it. He emailed his response before the end of his shift. He started on the first Monday of the following month. The headquarters building was a 42-story glass tower on Park Avenue, and Benjamin walked into the lobby at 7:45 in the morning, wearing the best clothes he owned, a dark navy jacket, dark trouser shoes he had polished the night before. The lobby receptionist directed him to the 31st floor without looking up from her screen. The elevator played no music. The 31st floor was quiet in that specific corporate way that meant people had been there for hours, already working in the hush of early ambition. His direct manager was a woman named Sandra Oakes, deputy director of corporate operations, who was approximately 50 years old, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the efficient energy of someone who had stopped wasting time on things that didn't matter sometime in the previous decade. She walked him through the role in 22 minutes, gave him access. Credentials showed him the vendor contact lists, the maintenance schedules, the incident reporting system. She did not mention Evelyn Harrington. She did not mention the Gala. She treated him exactly the way she would have treated any other new coordinator, which was either a deliberate act of professionalism or a genuine indifference to backstory. Either way, Benjamin was grateful for it. He spent his first day learning the building. By the end of the week, he had already identified 3 vendor contracts that were due for renegotiation, flagged a recurring HVAC issue on the 28th floor that had apparently been generating complaints for 6 months without resolution, and introduced himself to every member of the maintenance and security staff by name. He did not try to make himself noticed. He simply did the work. The problem was that other people were noticing anyway. It started the way these things always start, not with a confrontation, but with the temperature of a room. Conversations that stopped a beat too late when he walked in. A group lunch that he was not quite included in. A comment someone made in the break room about the Harrington Gala that was directed at no one in particular and clearly intended for him. The narrative had already been written by the time he arrived, drafted somewhere in the overlap between company gossip and the 3 photographs that had circulated on social media the morning after the gala images taken by guests on their phones, showing a man in a cleaning uniform holding the hand of Evelyn Harrington on the dance floor of her own event. The captions varied. The implication did not. By his second week, a columnist for a financial news site had published a short item under the headline, "Harrington's Gala Moment Charity," or something else. The piece was careful not to say anything actionable. It didn't need to. The structure of the question did the work framing Benjamin as a variable that required explanation, a disruption to the expected order of things, a man whose presence in the headquarters of a multi-billion-dollar company was on its face convenient. Benjamin read the piece once, set his phone face down on his desk, and returned to the vendor contract he had been reviewing. He understood what was happening. He had understood it from the moment the HR coordinator had said the company name on the phone. He had understood it at the gala, too, in the half-second after he extended his hand, the way the room arranged itself around the gesture, the way the silence fell with the particular weight of people witnessing something that violated an order they had agreed upon without ever discussing it. He was not naive about what he represented to people who needed to make sense of a situation like this one. A cleaner who became a coordinator, who danced with the billionaire. There was a story that wrote itself, and it was not a flattering one. He did his job. He did it well. He kept his head down and his work quality high, and he told himself that the only thing that mattered was what was actually true. He was mostly able to believe that. Evelyn did not seek him out during those first weeks. She was on the 38th floor. He was on 31. Their organizational charts did not overlap. In a building of over 400 employees, it was entirely possible to exist in the same tower for months without crossing paths, and Evelyn had not extended the job offer with any expectation of proximity. She had extended it because it was the right decision for the company, and because she believed in making decisions she could justify on their own terms, independently of everything else. She told herself this repeatedly, with the precision of someone who knows they are constructing an argument. What she did not tell herself, could not quite manage to put into a sentence she was willing to finish, was that the 3 minutes on the dance floor had done something she hadn't anticipated. Not to her evening. To her. The particular kind of loneliness she had inhabited for more than a decade was not the dramatic, visible kind. It was functional. She ran a company, she attended events. She had conversations and made decisions and moved through the world with the full authority of everything she had built. But somewhere inside all of that, there was a version of Evelyn Harrington who had not been genuinely seen by another person in so long that she had quietly stopped expecting it. Benjamin Carter had looked at her like she was a person. It was such a small thing. It was also the thing she could not stop returning to in the quiet of her apartment, in the margins of board meetings, in the elevator, on the way up to 38. A man she didn't know in a uniform that marked him as outside the boundaries of her world had walked across a room full of people who had spent the entire evening performing connection and offered her something none of them had thought to give. She did not know what to do with that. She filed it the way she filed anything she could not immediately act on, and returned to the work in front of her. But she did not forget it. The first time they spoke after the gala was accidental, or at least unplanned. Evelyn was in the building's first-floor atrium on a Thursday afternoon, finishing a call with a foundation partner, when Benjamin came through the main entrance, carrying a folder of vendor documents he had taken to a face-to-face meeting 2 blocks away. He saw her first. He didn't change course or look away. He simply walked in the direction he had been walking, and when their paths came within speaking distance, he stopped. "Ms. Harrington," he said, straightforward, not stiff. "Mr. Carter," she ended her call. "How is the transition going?" "Good," he said. "The building has a lot of deferred maintenance. I've been working through the list." "Sandra mentioned you flagged the HVAC issue. 6 months is a long time for a recurring problem to stay open," he said. "Not critical, factual." Evelyn looked at him in the flat light of the atrium with the noise of the lobby moving around them, and found that the observation she had made at the gala held. He was the same person here that he had been there. The setting had changed completely. He had not. There was something almost disorienting about it. The consistency of him, the way he occupied whatever room he was in, without apology and without performance. "I appreciate the thoroughness," she said. He nodded the same unhurried way he had nodded at the end of the waltz, and continued toward the elevator bank. Evelyn sat with the silence he left behind, and recognized with the clarity she usually reserved for financial analysis that she was in territory she had not been in for a very long time. She was not sure if that was a warning or an invitation. She suspected with the part of her that was honest, even when it was inconvenient, that it might be both. The trip was Evelyn's idea, though she would not have called it that. She would have called it a site visit, a scheduled review of the Harrington Foundation's flagship community development project in Newark, where the organization had been funding a workforce training center for the past 3 years. The visit required 2 days a small logistics team and someone from facilities operations to coordinate the physical setup for the donor presentation. Sandra Oakes assigned Benjamin without comment. It was the practical choice. Benjamin had already been managing the vendor relationship for the event equipment. The assignment made sense on paper, and Sandra was a woman who made decisions based on what made sense on paper. Evelyn learned he would be on the trip the same way she learned most operational details in a briefing document 3rd line from the bottom. She read it, moved to the 4th line, and did not mention it to anyone. They drove out on a Wednesday morning in a company vehicle with Evelyn's assistant, a logistics coordinator named Diane, and Benjamin in the back seat, working through a checklist on a tablet. The Newark facility was a converted warehouse space, high ceilings, exposed ductwork, large windows that let in the kind of flat industrial light that made everything look slightly more serious than it was. The staff there were efficient and prepared, and the setup went without friction. Benjamin coordinated the equipment placement with the facility manager, a methodical man named Gerald, who clearly appreciated working with someone who didn't require things to be explained twice. Evelyn spent the morning in back-to-back meetings with the program directors, reviewing outcomes data and discussing expansion plans for the following fiscal year. She was good at this part, precise, engaged, asking questions that cut to the center of things, without making the people across the table feel interrogated. This was where she was most herself, in rooms where the conversation had a purpose and the stakes were real. It wasn't until the late afternoon, when the meetings had cleared and Diane had stepped out to handle a scheduling conflict, that Evelyn found herself in the facility's small break room with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm, and Benjamin came in to return a set of keys to the hook by the door. He noticed the coffee. "There's a fresh pot," he said, nodding toward the machine on the counter. "I know," Evelyn said. "I keep forgetting to drink it while it's hot." He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter with the ease of a man who was comfortable in break rooms, in the functional, unheroic spaces where actual work happened. He didn't try to fill the silence. He didn't make conversation about the facility or the program or how impressive the foundation's work was. He just drank his coffee. After a moment, Evelyn said, You grew up somewhere with winters. Benjamin looked at her. Buffalo, he said. How did you know? The way you walk in a parking lot, she said. You check the ground before you step. People who grow up on ice do that. He considered this with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than flattery. Sharp, he said simply, and meant it. It was not a significant exchange. It lasted perhaps 4 minutes. But it was the first conversation they had that wasn't about work, and both of them knew it, and neither of them made anything of it, which was somehow the most significant part. The donor presentation the following morning went well. Evelyn spoke for 20 minutes, without notes, walking the room through the foundation's 3-year outcomes in a way that was honest about what hadn't worked as well as what had. Major donors responded to that kind of candor. They had been flattered and managed by enough organizations to recognize when they were being told the truth. By the time the session ended, 2 of the 6 attendees had signaled interest in increasing their commitments for the following year. On the drive back to Manhattan, Diane fell asleep in the front seat within 20 minutes. The logistics coordinator had taken an early train in that morning and had been running on insufficient sleep and too much coffee since 6 a.m. Benjamin was beside Evelyn in the back seat, looking out the window at the industrial stretch of Route 21, and the car was quiet in the particular way that emerges when everyone has been working hard and the work is finished. Evelyn said without fully planning to, "You haven't asked me about the accident." Benjamin didn't look at her immediately. When he did, his expression was even. "It's not my business," he said. "Most people can't help themselves," she said. "They find a way to get there eventually, through a compliment usually. You're so strong, you don't let it stop you. And then they wait for me to offer the story." "I'm not waiting for anything," Benjamin said. She looked at him in the gray light of the highway, the skyline of Manhattan beginning to reassemble itself in the distance, and she believed him. That was the part that was difficult to explain. Not that he said the right thing, but that the right thing, when he said it, had the unmistakable texture of something true. She had spent 11 years developing a near-perfect calibration for the difference between what people performed and what they actually felt, and Benjamin Carter consistently registered as someone who didn't perform. He simply was whatever he was, and left it there. "I was 31, she said, not because he had earned it, or because she owed it to him, but because she wanted to." A car accident on the Merritt Parkway. The other driver ran a red light at 60 miles an hour. I was in surgery for 9 hours. They told me I would likely never walk again, and they were right. She said it the way she said most things, without decoration, without the particular cadence people used when they were asking for a response. I've made my peace with it. What I haven't made peace with is the way other people haven't. Benjamin was quiet for a moment that didn't feel like hesitation so much as respect. "The way they look at you," he said. "The way they look at me," she confirmed. "Or the way they stop looking. Both are the same problem." He turned back to the window. Outside, the highway opened up and the city came closer. "My ex-wife used to say I was hard to read," he said. She meant it as a complaint. I think I just got tired of explaining myself to people who had already decided what they were going to see. Evelyn said nothing. She didn't need to. The parallel was clear, and neither of them needed to draw it out loud. They rode the rest of the way in a silence that was, for the first time in as long as either of them could remember, genuinely comfortable. Whatever had shifted between them on that drive was not acknowledged directly, and did not need to be. They returned to their respective floors, their respective work, the ordinary structure of a week at Harrington Group. But something had changed in the atmospheric pressure of things, the way they moved when they were in the same room, the way a conversation that had once felt professionally careful now had a different quality, more direct, less managed. Diane noticed. Sandra Oakes, who noticed most things, almost certainly noticed. No one said anything, which meant everyone was watching. The photograph was taken 3 weeks later at a follow-up site visit to a different foundation project in the Bronx. The moment it captured was in itself unremarkable. Evelyn and Benjamin standing outside the facility building at the end of the day, close enough together that their posture suggested conversation rather than professional distance. Benjamin's hand resting briefly on the handle of her wheelchair as they turned toward the parking area. It was a gesture of ordinary, practical consideration he had offered to help navigate a section of the sidewalk that had broken pavement, and Evelyn had neither accepted nor declined, simply allowed it, which was itself unusual. She rarely allowed it. Someone in a passing vehicle took the photo through an open window. Whether it was deliberate or opportunistic was impossible to know. The image appeared on a financial gossip blog by 6 the following morning and was picked up by 3 larger outlets before noon. By 3 in the afternoon, Harrington Group's stock had dropped 1.4%. By 5, Evelyn's communications director was in her office with a printed briefing sheet and an expression that suggested she had been preparing this conversation in the elevator. The headline most of them used was a variation of the same construction: Harrington CEO's close relationship with employee raises questions. Some were more direct. One tabloid simply ran the photo under the words, "Who is he?" Evelyn read through the coverage with a stillness that her communications director, a woman named Patricia Walsh, had learned not to misread as calm. It was concentration. It was Evelyn processing the full shape of a problem before she responded to any part of it. "The board is going to call," Patricia said. "I know," Evelyn said. "They'll want a statement." "I know that too." Patricia set the briefing sheet on the desk and gave her employer the direct look of someone who had earned the right to say the thing other people were avoiding. "Evelyn, what do you want to do?" Evelyn set down the tablet she'd been reading from and looked out the window at the city 38 floors below. The grid of it, the indifferent motion of 10,000 people going about their afternoon, with no awareness of the conversation happening in this office. "I want to know who took that photograph," she said. "And I want to know why it moved so quickly." Patricia's expression shifted only slightly, but Evelyn caught it. "You think it wasn't random? A drop of 1.4% in 3 hours is a fast reaction to a photograph of 2 people standing on a sidewalk," Evelyn said. "And I think there are people on this board who have been waiting for a reason." The board's emergency call came the following morning. 7 members, 2 joining by video from different time zones, the rest in the conference room on the 39th floor, with the particular stiffness of people who had prepared their positions in advance. The chairman, a 70-year-old man named Richard Holloway, who had been on the Harrington board since before Evelyn took control of the company, led the discussion with the careful neutrality of someone who had already decided the outcome. The concern as framed was about optics, about the company's reputation with its institutional partners, about the perception of preferential treatment, and the questions that raised about governance standards. They did not use Benjamin's name for the first 12 minutes. When they finally did, it was in the passive construction of people who understood liability, the employee in question. Evelyn listened to all of it without interruption. When the room finished, she said, "What you're describing is a photograph of 2 colleagues outside a work site. If that's sufficient grounds for a governance conversation, I'd like to see the standard applied consistently across the organization." Richard Holloway leaned forward in his chair. His voice carried the gentleness of someone delivering a verdict they had already written. "Evelyn, we're not questioning your judgment on the project. We're asking you to be mindful of how this looks. The optics of a personal relationship between the CEO and a junior employee." "There is no personal relationship," Evelyn said. The room accepted this without quite believing it, which was its own kind of answer. The call ended with a resolution to monitor the situation and revisit if the media attention continued. No formal action. No ultimatum. Not yet. But Evelyn understood what had happened. She had been given a warning wrapped in concern by people who had learned long ago that the most effective pressure was the kind that didn't announce itself. Benjamin heard about the board, called the same way he heard about most things that happened above the 31st floor, indirectly through the specific silence that fell around him in certain rooms, through the shift in the way some of his colleagues made or didn't make eye contact. Sandra Oaks called him into her office on Thursday afternoon and told him with characteristic directness that there had been some discussion at the senior level about the photograph and that he should be aware the situation was being monitored. Monitored for what, he said. Sandra looked at him over her reading glasses. For how it develops, she said, which was the honest answer, even if it wasn't a satisfying one. He returned to his desk and sat for a long time without opening anything on his computer. He thought about the conversation in the back of the car, the way Evelyn had said, "I haven't made peace with the way other people haven't the flatness of it," the exhaustion underneath the years of management that statement contained. He thought about what it had cost her to build what she had built, and he thought about the photograph, and he thought about what it meant that a single image of two people standing on a public sidewalk could move a company's stock price in 3 hours. He thought about what he was doing here, in this building, on this floor, in this life that was not the one he had planned. He was not a complicated man. He believed in work and in honesty and in the basic principle that you did not make other people's lives harder if you could help it. He had walked across a dance floor because the moment had required it, and because he was incapable of standing still while something wrong was happening in front of him. That was all it had ever been. The problem was that it had become something more, somewhere between Buffalo and the Merritt Parkway and a break room in Newark, and he was not sure what to do with that. He was not sure he had the right to do anything with it at all. Benjamin's resignation letter was 4 sentences long. He wrote it on a Sunday night at the small desk in his apartment in Queens, in the same deliberate way he did most things without drama, without excess, with the understanding that the fewer words you used, the less room there was for misinterpretation. He cited personal reasons. He gave 2 weeks' notice, then decided 2 weeks was too long, and revised it to 1. He emailed it to Sandra Oaks at 11:47 in the evening, closed his laptop, and sat in the dark for a while before going to bed. He did not call Evelyn. He did not leave a message with her assistant or send an email to her personal address, which he had never used and would not use now. He had thought about it, had written and deleted 3 different versions of something he might say, and each time arrived at the same conclusion: there was nothing he could offer her that would make his leaving easier, and the attempt would only make it harder. The photograph had done what it had done. The board had responded the way boards responded. He had watched the stock price drop in real time on his phone and understood with the clarity of someone who had no illusions about where he stood in the architecture of her world that he was the variable that needed to be removed. He told himself this was the right decision. He believed it approximately 70% of the time. The other 30% kept returning to the same question he couldn't answer cleanly. If he left and the board still moved against her, he would have given up everything and protected nothing. He set that thought aside. He was good at setting things aside. He went to bed. Evelyn found out on Monday morning when Sandra forwarded the resignation email without comment. She read it twice, set her phone face down on her desk, and did not move for approximately 90 seconds. Then she picked the phone back up and called Sandra directly. "Did he say anything else?" Evelyn said. "No," Sandra said. "Just what's in the letter." Evelyn ended the call. She looked at the window at the city beyond it, at the unremarkable Monday morning proceeding below, without any awareness of what had just happened in this office. She had been left before by partners, by colleagues, by board members, who had smiled at her across conference tables for years before voting against her. She understood abandonment as a structural feature of power, something you accounted for and moved past. What she had not accounted for was this: the particular quality of Benjamin's absence, arriving with no explanation and no warning in the form of 4 sentences and a 1-week notice, felt different from the ordinary losses of her professional life, in a way she could not immediately categorize, and therefore could not immediately manage. She did not reach out to him. She had her pride, and she had her instincts, and both told her that chasing someone who had chosen to leave was a form of self-erasure she was not willing to perform. She buried the feeling the way she had buried most things that didn't have an immediate solution, and she returned to the week in front of her. The week in front of her was not kind. The board meeting had been scheduled for the third Thursday of the month, which meant it fell 8 days after Benjamin's resignation. By then, the story had evolved in the way these stories evolved, when left without a counter-narrative, filling in its own gaps, acquiring details that no one had verified, becoming more confident the longer it went unchallenged. A second outlet had run a longer piece, this one with quotes from 2 anonymous sources described as people familiar with the situation at Harrington Group, who suggested that the CEO's judgment had been compromised by a personal entanglement, and that certain members of the board were concerned about the direction of the company's leadership. Patricia Walsh brought the piece to Evelyn's attention at 7 in the morning. Evelyn read it, standing up still in her coat, and noted 2 things. The language used by the anonymous sources was specific in the way that suggested familiarity with internal board communications, and the timing dropped the day before. The monthly board meeting wasn't accidental. "Someone leaked," Evelyn said. "That's what it looks like," Patricia said. Evelyn handed back the tablet. "Find out who," she said. "I don't need it before the meeting. I need it to be accurate." The board meeting began at 10 a.m. in the 39th floor conference room, with the kind of procedural formality that meant something had already been decided before anyone sat down. Richard Holloway opened with a review of the quarter's financial performance, which was strong. The numbers were genuinely good, and everyone in the room knew it, which made what came next more difficult to justify and therefore more carefully constructed. The conversation moved by degrees, from performance to governance, from governance to leadership continuity, from leadership continuity to the question of whether the current structure of executive authority at Harrington Group was serving the company's long-term interests. Evelyn sat at the head of the table and let it develop. She had attended enough meetings to know that the shape of a trap was often more visible from inside it than outside, and she wanted to understand the full geometry of this one before she responded to any part of it. Richard said carefully that several board members had expressed concern about the cumulative effect of recent events on investor confidence. He said that the board's responsibility was to the company and its stakeholders, and that in fulfilling that responsibility, they had a duty to ask difficult questions, especially when those questions were uncomfortable. He said that a formal review of executive decision-making authority was not a punitive measure, but a prudent one, given the current climate. What he was describing, translated out of its diplomatic syntax, was a vote to reduce Evelyn's operational control. Structural, incremental, and functionally irreversible once it passed. Evelyn looked around the table. She counted 4 members whose expressions carried the specific quality of people waiting for something. Not nervous, not uncomfortable waiting. She said, "Before we proceed to any formal vote, I'd like to share some information the board may not have." Richard's expression shifted by a fraction. "Of course," he said. The door to the conference room opened. Benjamin had spent the 8 days since his resignation doing what he did when he needed to think working. The thought he had set aside on Sunday night had not stayed set aside. By Monday morning, it had become a certainty. Leaving had not made Evelyn safer. It had only made her more isolated, which was exactly what the people moving against her needed. He couldn't undo the resignation, but he could do what he had always done, identify the actual problem and address it directly. He opened his laptop and went back through 3 months of publicly available financial filings, board disclosures, and regulatory documents related to Harrington Group. He was not a financial analyst. He was a man who had spent 4 years managing vendor contracts, and vendor contracts required you to read documents carefully and notice when numbers didn't match the story being told about them. What he found working across 4 nights and 2 weekends was not a smoking gun. It was a pattern, the kind that didn't announce itself, that required you to look at several things simultaneously and understand what they meant in relation to each other. 3 board members, including Richard Holloway, had personal investment vehicles with indirect exposure to a competing real estate fund that would benefit materially from a reduction in Harrington Group's market position. The timing of the photograph's leak, traceable with some effort to an account with connections to a PR firm that 2 of those 3 board members had used previously, was not conclusive, but was notable. The pattern of sell orders in the hour before the image went public was the kind of thing that financial regulators found interesting. Benjamin compiled all of it into a documented file and contacted the SEC's whistleblower office. He had also, on the morning of the board meeting, called Patricia Walsh, whose number he had from the Newark site visit, and told her what he had found and that he was on his way to the building. Patricia had said, "How long until you're here?" He had said, 20 minutes. She had said, "Use the service entrance." He walked into the 39th floor conference room carrying a laptop and a printed document set, and the room received him with the particular silence of people confronted with something they had not prepared for. He had not put on the navy jacket. He was wearing what he always wore, dark trousers, a plain shirt, the clothes of a man who had stopped performing anything he wasn't. He set the documents on the table in front of Richard Holloway, without ceremony, and said, "I think the board should see this before any votes are taken." Richard looked at the documents, then at Benjamin, then at Evelyn, with the expression of a man rapidly recalculating something. "This is highly irregular," he said. "Yes," Benjamin said. "So is coordinating a media leak to move a stock price." The room did not go silent, because it was already silent. What changed was the quality of the silence, the way it shifted from the controlled stillness of a managed meeting to something rawer and less certain, the silence of people who understood that the situation had changed shape and were not yet sure what shape it had become. Evelyn said to the room at large, "The documents Mr. Carter has provided outline a pattern of financial conflicts of interest among 3 members of this board, a probable connection between those members and the leak of the photograph to financial media and trading activity in the 48 hours before that leak that warrants regulatory review." She said it the way she said everything, without decoration, without the performance of anger, with the flat authority of someone who had already decided what the outcome of this meeting would be. "I have already been in contact with outside counsel. A report has been filed with the SEC. The board members in question are welcome to retain their own representation." Richard Holloway did not speak for a long moment. Around the table, the 4 members, who had been waiting with such particular patience, now carried the specific stillness of people who had just watched a door lock from the outside. "This meeting is adjourned," Evelyn said. The legal process that followed was not swift. These things were never swift. But the filing created a public record, and a public record changed the physics of the situation in ways that mattered more immediately than any eventual ruling. 2 of the 3 implicated board members resigned within the week, citing personal reasons in letters of 4 sentences or fewer. The 3rd retained counsel and said nothing publicly. The stock recovered its losses within 10 days and added 2% beyond that, because markets responded to the appearance of resolved uncertainty even before uncertainty was actually resolved. Evelyn did not speak to Benjamin in the conference room after the meeting adjourned. There were lawyers to call and statements to coordinate and a company to stabilize, and the work of it expanded to fill every available hour in the way that work always did when it was also a refuge. She was good at the refuge. She had been using it for 11 years. It was Patricia who told her 3 days later that Benjamin had gone back to Queens. "He's not coming back to the company," Evelyn said. "He didn't ask to," Patricia said. "He did what he came to do." Evelyn sat with that. He did what he came to do. She turned it over and examined it from different angles, the way she examined anything she needed to understand fully before she acted on it. She called him on a Friday evening, not through an assistant, not through HR. She called his number directly from her own phone sitting in her apartment, with the city going dark outside the windows. He answered on the third ring. "Evelyn," he said. "You left," she said. "I thought it was the right thing," he said. "It wasn't," she said. "You left me alone in the middle of something, and you didn't explain yourself, and you made the decision for me without asking me what I needed. I've had enough people do that to last several lifetimes." The line was quiet, not empty. She could hear him breathing the ambient sound of his apartment, the particular texture of a person thinking rather than deflecting. "You're right," he said. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know," she said. "That's not what I needed." "What did you need?" he said. She looked out at the city, at the 10,000 lit windows of 10,000 lives, proceeding without complication. And she answered him with the honesty she had spent 11 years keeping in reserve for people who had earned it. "Someone who stays," she said. "That's all. Someone who doesn't make the calculation and decide I'm better off without them. I've had enough of people deciding what's best for me from the outside." Another quiet. Then Benjamin said, "I'm not good at leaving things unfinished." "I know," she said. "So I'd like to not leave this one unfinished," he said. "If that's still an option." Evelyn said, "It's still an option." The following year's Harrington Foundation Gala was held on the last Friday of October, in the same ballroom, with the same orchestra, with 230 guests who had all heard the story of the previous year in one version or another, and had come, if they were honest with themselves, at least partly to see what happened next. What happened was this: the evening proceeded the way galas preceded the champagne, the conversations, the careful circulation of money and reputation through a room arranged to facilitate both. The Foundation's outcomes report was presented and well received. 3 new donors committed to multi-year partnerships. The food was good. The orchestra was better. When the final waltz began, the room arranged itself the way it always did, couples drifting toward the floor, the uninvested drifting toward the edges, the natural sorting that happens in any room when music begins. Evelyn was near the center of the room, this time not at the edge. She had been in conversation with a foundation partner and had simply stayed where she was when the music started, unhurried, without the old reflex of withdrawal. Benjamin appeared at her side. He was not in a cleaning uniform. He was wearing a dark suit that fit him well, and he looked like a man who was exactly where he intended to be. He extended his hand, the same way he had extended it a year ago, without ceremony, without theater, with the simple clarity of someone who had decided and was not going back on the decision. Evelyn looked at his hand. She looked at him. Around them, a few nearby guests had noticed, and the noticing was spreading outward through the room in the quiet, inevitable way that attention always spread, but it was different from the silence of a year ago. There was no shock in it. There was something else, the particular quality of a room watching something. It recognized something it had, perhaps in some private corner of itself, been hoping to see. She took his hand. He moved her chair into the waltz, the same way he had the first time, with the same steadiness, the same unhurried attention to the music and the space and the woman in front of him. But this time, he wasn't a stranger stepping out of the dark. He was someone she knew, someone who had stayed and left and come back, someone who understood the full weight of what it meant to offer a hand and mean it without reservation. The orchestra played. The floor moved around them, and not a single person in that ballroom looked at Evelyn Harrington with anything resembling pity.